Good, Dan? Good? Yep.
Recording in progress.
We'll go ahead and commence the Board of Commissioners meeting for Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024. Please note that a copy of the Open Meetings Act is located on the north wall of the Legislative Chamber alongside of automatic external defibrillator as well. Please stand for the pledge. We'll first jump into our Board of Equalization meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Borgeson. Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Kavanaugh. Commissioner Friend. Commissioner Morgan. Commissioner Rogers. Mr. Chair.
Here. First item of business are items A and B. A being the approval of the minutes of the Board of Equalization meeting held Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. B, call for a meeting on set Tuesday, July 30th, 2024 as date for hearing on certified assessment corrections reflecting the addition of omitted property to the tax rolls or increased value on property. Do I have a motion and a second?
Second.
Motion by Rogers, second by Morgan. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Next, we have resolutions C through F, which we can take in a block if desired.
Second.
Motion approved C through F by Rogers, second by Morgan. Is there anybody here to comment on any of the resolutions on equalization? C through F. If not, we'll vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Next, we have item G, a presentation on the 3-year plan of assessment with Mr. Goodwillie.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mike Goodwillie, Douglas County Assessor's Office. Presentation is maybe a little bit bold. State law requires an assessment office prepare a 3-year plan of assessment every year and present it to the County Board of Equalization. It's a bit of an odd assignment for 2 reasons. One is that the assessment office's job is to hold up a mirror to what market value is doing. And I've always believed it's sort of a fool's errand to try and project 3 years out. And the other thing is it's kind of the wrong time of year in the sense that the study period of arm's length sales against which our values are measured for the upcoming 2025 year doesn't even close until the end of September. So there's no real way in July to tell you for certain where we're absolutely going to be at. What I can say, and what the materials I provided for you do, is it tells you where we were for 24, and the trends we're sort of seeing. And what we saw from 23 to 24 was a little bit of a slowdown in the appreciation of selling prices for residential property. I know we sent significantly fewer valuation change notices in 24 than we did in 23. It may be that that trend continues, but again, until we have the final results of the sales study, we aren't going to know that for sure. What I've also tried to do in this report is to lay out those statutory functions that we need to accomplish to get to those requirements of state law of market value and uniform and proportionate valuations. So for example, there's a lot of activity that goes on both on the residential and commercial side. For example, we're required to inspect every property in Douglas County at least once within a 6-year window. So that's an ongoing thing that we do. In any event, that's the report. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them.
All right, Commissioner Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Goodwillie. I believe
the numbers going to the referee were down this year?
I don't have the exact numbers. I think Dan Esch was kind enough to forward a note that said we were somewhere around 4,500
40, yes.
protests,
And I
which
think
is
we've been as high.
significantly lower than 2023.
Yeah. And then the other thing I think you've tried to do, I believe, and you correct me, I think the assessor's office has tried to keep the values closer to that 92% instead of the 100%.
We have in recent years been at the lower end of the range. That's certainly true. And when you're at the lower end of the range, it does at least blunt the impact of what we're seeing in sales prices. So yes, if you're at the lower end of the range, values are going to be lower than if you were at the upper end of the range. So yes, I think that's a fair conclusion
And
to
I
reach.
think that's really a positive for our citizens, at least helpful to their values. So thank you.
Commissioner Borgeson, then Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, when a home is purchased, how is it placed on the books? Is it placed on the books at 100%? No.
No,
And if not,
in
why?
fact, that's something that people sometimes suggest. Well, just move things to their most recent selling price. There's a small constitutional issue with that in terms of uniformity and proportionality, and it's best embodied by a case that came out of Douglas County about 25 years ago called Scribante. And there was a guy named A.J. Scribante, and he and his wife Linda were always in the social pages back when the World Herald actually had a social page. And he bought a house in Fair Acres for a little over $1 million, and the assessor at the time quickly moved the value to just a little bit less than his selling price. And Mr. Scribante protested, not because his value didn't reflect the fair market value of his property, but because he wasn't uniform and proportionate with his neighbors, who hadn't received increases in many years, because the policy of the assessor's office back in that era was to only change value when a property sold, somebody took out a building permit, or when the old State Board of Equalization told him to. And what Scribante did was he hired an appraiser to do a rather comprehensive market study of the sales prices and values in his neighborhood, and he discovered that his neighbors were all being assessed at about 60% of their market value, and he was being assessed at close to 100% of his. And what the uniformity and proportionality clause requires is that everybody be at the same relative standard in relation to market value. So the Supreme Court reduced his value from about 1.1 million to about 770,000. Merry Christmas, Mr. Scribante. And that's kind of an example of why you don't do that. What happens instead is we review the sales in a neighborhood, and if we have enough of them to indicate that, yes, that neighborhood needs to be reappraised, that the sales prices are significantly more than market value, then we'll reappraise the whole neighborhood. But under the state constitution, we're required to treat sold and unsold properties in a similar way. So that's why that doesn't happen quite that way.
Well, I actually remember that case.
Yeah.
But at the same time, eventually that happens. I mean, eventually, again, you're going to look at the market depending on when you're going to reassess the area.
No argument, Commissioner. We absolutely do care about selling prices in a neighborhood. But what we don't do is just pick out the sold properties to reappraise.
I don't know. That doesn't make sense to me, because if we're trying to be between 92 and 100, and I get the equalization issue, but again, the next year, you're going to do what should have been done the first year. So anyway, I was just wondering why we didn't do that, but I do remember that case now. Thanks.
We'll go to Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mike, let me go back to a statement you made when Commissioner Morgan talked. And it's, you try to stay at the lower end of the range.
That's where we've been, yes.
Now, the obvious, the lower end of the range is better for the taxpayer, but the lower end of the range to me is also bad for the taxpayer, because this year we didn't have massive the heat was cooler. But for the past previous 4 years, because you were at the lower end of the range, the 2-year average, you were at the lower end of the range, so you're at the 92, at the 94s, and then you come in next year at 88.
Yes, I absolutely understand where you're going. If you are at the low end of the range in a rising market, yep, you're probably going to have to touch some of the same properties the very next year, because when you compare with the more recent sales, now you're going to be in the mid 80s someplace, and that's what we've been seeing. That said, if you let's say put yourself at 98 or 99 or even 100, in the short run, that's a much bigger increase. And second, given what we've seen in the marketplace, there have been some years over the last half dozen where if you started, say, at 98, you wouldn't necessarily be insulated from having to make some changes to some of those same neighborhoods. I mean,
So-
that's how fast value's been appreciated.
Yeah, so
some
stop
places.
right there, that's my point. My point is, and I guess this is already done, you're at the lower end of the range. So the point is, while you're at the lower end of the range, and the market is slowed enough, I would assume we got some way not to take you to 98, but I'm thinking we at least gotta get to 95 and 96, so you can absorb the good years and the bad years and not have this fluctuation of having to go from 88 to 94.
And Commissioner, over time that may happen, but things have been moving so fast in the last half dozen years. It's been all hands on deck to just even get into the range, and not be and not make increases even more than what we already have to get in the range.
Well, no, I just want to put it on record because
Yeah.
I didn't.
No,
I
no,
mean,
that's-
there's some faultiness in this. I mean, people thinking, okay, you should keep it at the lower end of the range, but you putting yourself in a bad position where if it's at the lower end of the range, you may get mandated by the state, and then you're in a whole nother level.
It's possible. I'll tell you a story. Lancaster County used to do a huge residential reassessment, get as close to 100% as they could.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd kind of let 3 years go by and just hang on, right? As sales appreciated, the ratios would come down. And then in that fourth year, then they'd do another big reappraisal. Great idea until the last half dozen years hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've had to kind of abandon that because the market was moving, so fast. Yeah, exactly. And so, yes, if you're at the high end of the range, you hope it'll insulate you for a year or two, but there's no guarantee that happens.
Yeah, and I almost feel like you hedging your bets in the stock market, but I would say that just want to put on record that being that we don't have enough housing stock, I'm assuming that rate of increase is going to be a substantial piece. So I'm just thinking, how do we get to the mid-range somewhere to play the game?
Yeah, there is certainly, if state law requires, and it does, that we value property at its most probable price if it were sold in the open market, and you have the laws of supply and demand driving price up like crazy. We all like the free market until we don't, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that does create some real problems.
That's time. Thank you. We'll move to Commissioner Boyle.
Yeah, thank you for this. This was very helpful, Mr. Goodwillie. And I just would like a little bit of a review, just to get it on the record, about how properties really are appraised. Just because you had mentioned, so again, it's just kind of an overview, not a question so much. You had mentioned how with a sale price of a home, that individually won't, because it's not equitable just to raise that particular individual's price. How do you get the whole neighborhood?
We have the county divided into a number of market areas, I think 19, and even then within the market areas there are neighborhoods. And what we try and do is review the data from what we call arm's length transactions. We call them valid sales. It doesn't mean an invalid sale doesn't mean, if we call a sale invalid, doesn't mean it doesn't transfer the property. What it means is it isn't particularly useful to us in measuring value. And so we're looking for arm's length sales, willing buyer, willing seller, exposure to the marketplace, not a family sale, not that kind of thing. And what we'll do is compare our assessed values to those selling prices. And we look at where they're falling on that range. And if they're out of range, then that makes that neighborhood or that market area a good candidate for reappraisal.
And so, and then with that, it states that properties are supposed to be reassessed or inspected every 6 years? Is that
Yes, it's a very common thing to misunderstand that requirement. An inspection doesn't necessarily mean the property is going to get reappraised, but certainly you try and do those things at the same time. But yes, we have a requirement that physically we have to go out and inspect at least once every 6 years.
And so with that, if, for example, you don't have your, an assessor or someone from the assessor's office come in and inspect every 6 years, like directly, you mentioned the arm's length transaction. So what happens when you don't have an inspector that's able to get into your house and look?
Let me stop. Inspection, at least the way it's defined in state regulation, is basically an outside look, pictures and measurements and so forth. We don't really get inside the houses unless somebody invites us in. And candidly, I'm not entirely thrilled about the prospect of being inside the houses. Given the society we live in today, all that has to happen is for our appraisers to leave a place when they've inspected the interior and the homeowner to say, oh my gosh, now I can't find my mom's priceless brooch. Well, it doesn't matter. We could have the most honest people in the world, didn't touch mom's priceless brooch. You don't win that argument, right? I mean, we'd really rather not be in that position, quite candidly. Sure. Or they peeped at my daughter in the bathroom, or I mean, God knows what kinds of things people would come up with.
So just backing it up a little bit, so when someone comes to us and says, my house is appraised, I got this tax valuation increase and my neighbor didn't. So does that mean that their house was inspected and the neighbor didn't have an inspection?
No. When people say things like that, you got to ask a couple of more questions to get context. Where did the neighbor start in relation to market value versus where did the person making the complaint start? Was work done on one property or the other property? Are they different in style? Are they different in condition? So there's always extra questions to ask, I guess is what I would say in response to that.
10 seconds.
Okay. Yep, I'll just stop there. All right, thanks.
Thank you. We'll go to Commissioner Morgan.
Lastly, say a couple things. When it was touched on, the supply and demand is a big issue because it wasn't that long ago, and I got this from the Real Estate Commission, there were only 3 homes listed for sale in Fremont, Nebraska. And that's had a dramatic effect even in Omaha because of the numbers, and you kind of stated that. The other thing you see is you may have a home sell, and oftentimes they'll do much work before they put it on the market in the kitchen or other things that do have an effect, or the neighbors' homes may not have had that kitchen update and so on. So you have a difficult task, and you try to do your best. And then,
we try to grade based on condition. One of the things that happens is we do have access to at least some permit information. So if somebody goes ahead and gets a permit, does a significant improvement on their home, well, that's a red flag for us. But we all know there's lots of people that don't necessarily do permitted improvements on their home. And yes, you are making some guesses about condition based on what you're seeing from the outside as well. So condition's a factor. One of the things I included with the report was a graph from the multiple listing service that talks about median closed selling prices since it looks like January of 2021 to the present, and it's startling. But that's what we've been looking at.
Well, appreciate the job that you're doing and constant working at it. But that supply and demand, I'm a little bit of a car guy. It was probably a year ago, thereabouts, that if you were trying to buy an Escalade or Corvette, you were paying maybe $25,000 to $50,000 over sticker. Today you can buy either one at sticker because of the supply and demand. And that's what
Commissioner,
we're
that's
seeing.
not going to happen for me anytime soon, but good to know.
But it is that supply and
Sure.
demand. When there's the demand but not the supply, it's a big issue.
Absolutely.
But we thank you for what you do.
Thank you very much. Are we?
Thank you. We'll go to Commissioner Friend.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mike, thanks for the information. Appreciate it, and the dialogue. I was just curious. I'm asking you to put like a, take your crystal ball and make based on your institutional knowledge, provide an opinion if you can. If assessors, we know what the legislature's about to do. They're about to go down and they're going to start, doing stuff, right? Let's just say, if the assessors in all 93 counties were mandated by the Constitution and state statute to assess value increase each year for an individual parcel and have it capped. So in other words, if there was a 5 or 10% cap, would we, I'm guessing here, would it ultimately cause an issue meeting that 92% of value, kind of like what Lancaster County did?
Well, if you were,
If you're gonna
yeah,
just,
no, great question, Commissioner. If you were going to have a cap, you'd probably have to adjust your requirements with respect to your target percentages. And the reason I say that is the reason that caps, as the Constitution, state Constitution is currently written, would have a problem is it's not that the cap isn't being applied evenly across the board, but it's where it leaves people. And by that I mean, again, when I was doing the recap of Scribante, uniform and proportionate means everybody's at the same relative percentage of market value, in this case between 92 and 100%. The problem with a cap is this. Let's say you have a 3% cap. Not every neighborhood's appreciating in value at the same rate. So let's say your house in Friend Estates, that's a neighborhood that's in incredible demand. Sales prices are going up 12 to 15% every year for several years. I live in Goodwillie Acres, and it's a less desirable neighborhood. My sales are appreciating 3 to 5% every year. So let's say we have a 3% cap. With every year the cap is applied, you are getting further and further below market value. And I'm staying still pretty close to market value, right? Because my market isn't appreciating as fast as yours. And so what that means is over time, for faster appreciating neighborhoods, those citizens are going to have less of a tax burden than those whose are appreciating less quickly. In other words, the poor saps in Goodwillie Acres are paying a much higher percentage of their market value than the people in Friend Estates are. And that's the problem with a cap. And so a couple of weeks ago, I think Commissioner Morgan mentioned the possibility of a cap, and he indicated that it would require a vote of the people. And what he was saying was, yeah, you'd have to have a constitutional change, in my estimation. And I've read the equalization cases dating back to the old Kearney Convention Center case years and years and years ago, and the state Supreme Court has been pretty adamant that what uniform and proportionate means is that you end up having relatively similar tax burdens based on value.
I'm not putting words in your mouth. I'm just now I'm making a statement. If you did go in and change the Constitution and the statutory requirements that allowed for not just one cap, but degrees of caps, and then you're preventing. I mean, how many times each year do you hear somebody come in and say, "Well, look, it went up $120,000. That's 18%." Anyway, I think I'm out of time. But anyway, I'm just brainstorming.
No, I appreciate the question.
Thank you. We'll go to Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So to build on Commissioner Friend's question and what you said, just will this happen? Because we went down this road in the 1998 governor's election. There was an initiative called 411 and 412. Mike Johans in the primary endorsed it. In the general election, he backed off of it because he got hell from some farmers in western Nebraska. And basically, if you do a cap and give that scenario that you did, how the cap would have worked, was that, yeah, you'd had the cap while you were in the home. And then all that gap that would have built up, when it sold, all that gap that would have built up, the buyer got full price and had that tax and had to pay it all back. Because the buyer that was there at the time did not
okay.
pay it. So you had
Okay.
it all built up. So when you buy my house, you take this cost and all the tax that's saved.
So in other words, it was a little bit like
It's California. It's a running example of it right now.
Yeah,
That's
it
what
was-
happens in California.
it was a little bit like for a long time under state law, if you were in special valuation, which is the preference that farmland gets. Then when it came out of special valuation, there was a recapture tax. So it was a little bit like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is why this cap thing. You want to live by the free market. You live by the free market. You want to play with it. Don't touch it.
Well, yeah. I mean, like I mentioned, people like the free market until they don't.
Yeah.
But yes, people have floated the cap idea, but the most significant hurdle for a cap is the uniformity and proportionality clause. As a little history, going back to the old Kearney Convention Center case, the facts of that were there was a hotel that got built, a convention center in Kearney. It was assessed at close to 100% of market value. And ag land in that county was assessed at 44%. And that case is what stimulated the breaking off of agricultural land into its own separate class with its own separate level of value. And so something similar would happen if you wanted to impose caps on residential or commercial or whatever class you wanted to do.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any other comments on this item? Larry?
Oh, good.
Thank you. Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, Omaha, 68132, Dundee area. I might like to ask a little leeway on the time limit, Roger, today. I know you can do that. But what we're listening to here is kind of a blame game. Everybody wants to say somebody else is responsible for this, but they're not. Also, this body and everybody on just making those decisions, including the state, have a conflict of interest against the citizen because of the programs that you all sponsor that require taxpayer dollars. That drives a lot of people like me out of a house. When I think that I paid $21,500 for my house in 1971, and the real estate people now and Mr. Goodwillie try to tell me that it's worth $380-some thousand. That also means that in order to move somewhere else, I probably have to spend more than $383,000. I'm a loser. You guys have a conflict of interest. Now, I'd like to tell you what it's like for a citizen to try and fight the system. It's a shame that there's not any people here today that were at the state presentation yesterday. But if 1/3 of the people that were at that, Roger was one of them, I noticed Marianne, if 1/3 of the citizens were down here today expressing what they expressed yesterday, you'd probably be kicking a bunch of them out. I might say a couple things here that you'll call me out of order for. However, this is the way it looks and feels to the citizen that goes through this process. For those of us that didn't get everything done shortly after the first of the year when you mailed out your preliminary values, I have to have all of my research and all of my comparables and all of my arguments reduced down to just a 5-minute damn interview. No explanations, no other information. Slam, damn, thank you, ma'am. Oh, excuse me, you have to give it to them, go over and have them scan it in the system. That was a waste of my time, the real estate guy's time, the so-called referee, and the county's time. Complete waste of tax dollars because it achieved nothing. I was down there a few weeks ago and had them scan it in anyway. I had no chance to discuss it. But this preliminary bullshit, if you will, says that that's my personal appraiser, my personal real estate appraiser. He's very unfriendly. It's not the first time. When I tried to explain how I got to my stuff, he's not interested. He says, tell him to go scan it in. That's the blame game. It's not his fault. It's not his employees' fault down there and the two people that grant you when you do walk in. And it's not the real estate professional's fault. But every one of those people have a conflict of interest in not hearing what the citizen is trying to tell you. I have stuff like that I finally took back over there and had them scan in. Because I had to spend months trying to drive around the neighborhood, walk around the neighborhood, and spy on my neighbors in order to fight what your website says.
That's time.
I have to fight. That is not very intelligible or friendly to a customer, citizen. It needs to be completely read. Just real quickly, I want to say one important thing, Roger.
That's time.
That value that you say, that he says is the land value and the sales
We have
value.
a resolution on a
Okay.
similar topic. If you want to come
They're
speak
wrong.
during that
They're
topic,
absolutely wrong.
you will be more than
See,
welcome.
this is the kind of treatment you get with them, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry. All right, we do not have a need for executive session for equalization, so I can take a motion for adjournment. Motion by Morgan, second by Rogers. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We'll now go into our Board of Corrections meeting. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Borgeson. Commissioner Boyle. Commissioner Kavanaugh. Commissioner Friend. Commissioner Morgan. Commissioner Rogers. Mr. Chair.
Here. First item is approval of the minutes of the Board of Corrections meeting held Tuesday, June 25th, 2024. Do I have a motion and second? Motion by Rogers, second by Friend. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We'll now go into item 2, report from the Director of Corrections, Director Myers.
Good morning, Commissioners. Michael Myers, Director of Corrections for Douglas County. You have before you our report for the month of June. At enclosure number 1, Administrative Services. At the completion of the fiscal year, we finished $13,127 under budget, under our $56,290,000 budget. There were $247,825 spent on overtime costs in June. The 5,001 hours of overtime is the lowest number of overtime hours in any given month in many years. It certainly precedes my tenure as director before we had a number that low. To personalize this, our staff, our uniform staff, averaged 3 hours of overtime per week. 2 years ago, many of our staff, they were all working at least 24 hours of overtime a week, mandatory, and many of them were above and beyond that, working sometimes 30 or even 40 hours a week of overtime on top of their regular 40 hours. So we've made tremendous strides. Approximately $830,000 in bond payments were processed by our records division. Enclosure number 2, Community Corrections and Reentry Services, and I do want to give a disclaimer. Our staff member who's responsible for sort of finalizing all of this data was on an extended vacation, so this data excludes the last few days of the month, and so those numbers will be included in the July report that I give to you next month. The Sanction Center and Transitional Discharge Center placed a total of 6 individuals in community corrections, saving 28 bed days in the jail. Work release admitted 13 individuals. House arrest admitted 42 individuals. The Reentry Assistance Program admitted 29. Reentry Services and Therapeutic Communities, there were 39 individuals admitted to therapeutic community housing units. 298 individuals were placed on pretrial release. That is an all-time high for a single month. Over the course of the month, 1,370 individuals were supervised on pretrial release. This is the 3rd consecutive month of all-time high levels of utilization. 595 individuals participated in 24/7 sobriety. That is also an all-time high. 122 individuals were supervised via GPS monitors. That saved 2,638 jail bed days. So pretrial release theoretically saved Douglas County $560,000 in detention costs. Law library usage on the tablet system continues to demonstrate increased access with cost effectiveness for Douglas County. Enclosure number 3, compliance. There's not a lot new to report on compliance right now, but we are continuing to comply all of our data for upcoming audits. Enclosure number 4, personnel. 4 officers below the rank of sergeant left employment, including 1 retirement. As of June 30th, we were 102% staffed among all correctional officer ranks. Our next academy is planned and actually began yesterday on July 22nd. 1 officer was promoted from CO1 to CO2. I want to congratulate Lakira Johnson, who was promoted to the position of pretrial services coordinator. I want to congratulate Officer Michael Langton on his well-deserved retirement. I want to also congratulate Officer Iva Stevens, Officer Wade Stevens, Sergeant Brian Locks, and Lieutenant Ted Swerzik, and Lieutenant Alexandria Johnson for celebrating their 20th year of service to DCDC. And then some in real rarefied air, congratulations to Officers Randy Johnson and Jimmy Caldwell, who each celebrated their 35th year of service to Douglas County. Enclosure number 5, population. We had 1,333 admissions. We had 1,292 releases. Our high count was 1,057. Our low count was 996. That is the first time in some time we've broken the 1,000 barrier. Probably unheard of to have that happen in the summer, though I will say July numbers will not be reflective of that. They have increased, but we did achieve under 1,000 in the month of June, which in my experience has only happened before maybe in December and January when we hit those slower times of the year. Our average daily population was 1,024, a decrease of 12 from the previous month. Our average length of stay for inmates released in June, the overall average length of stay was 28 days. 49.68 of our inmates stayed longer than 72 hours. If they stayed longer than 72 hours, their average length of stay was 55 days. 50.32% of our inmates were released within 72 hours of being booked, and that average length of stay was 1.37 days. There were 70 custodial sanction bed days. The U.S. Marshal population decreased. The average felony pre-trial population was 728, a small increase. The average daily misdemeanor pretrial population was 122, a small decrease. Probation violations remained stable. 19% of our population were between the ages of 18 and 24. 64% of our population were minorities. 15% of our population were female. And 19% of our population were homeless or nearly homeless. Turning to enclosure number 6, medical. There were 1,097 intake screenings, 359 health and physical assessments. Inmates were sent out 25 times for emergent medical care. 8 of those were by 911. There were 7 hospital admissions, which resulted in 20 days of hospitalization, and there were 41 off-site medical appointments. Enclosure number 7, mental health. There were 139 initial psychiatric assessments, 471 initial mental health assessments. There were 92 individuals placed on suicide precautions. There were 186 individuals placed on drug and alcohol withdrawal protocols, and there were no referrals to the Board of Mental Health or transfers to the Lincoln Regional Center. I did want to emphasize the last bullet. It was actually 50.1%, so I rounded down to 50, but this is the first time I've ever reported that there were more people incarcerated with a mental illness than were not. It's the first time we've crossed that threshold. Enclosure number 8, security operations and honor guard. Our crisis negotiation team was deployed 3 times. 2 were in conjunction with our CERT team. Incidents addressed included an individual who broke his glasses and was threatening to harm himself with the pieces, compliance with a medically mandated blood draw, and to facilitate a shower for a person with unhealthy hygiene. 2 of these incidents were resolved without force, and all 3 were resolved without injury. Our Correctional Emergency Response and Transport Team, or CERT, was deployed 6 times, twice in conjunction with CNT. Incidents addressed included transport of a high-risk individual to an attorney visit, transporting of 3 high-risk individuals to off-site medical appointments. 18 CERT team members attended GRACIE. That's an acronym. It's a survival tactics training. There were 9 searches conducted. Minor contraband included items modified for tattooing and nuisance items such as extra linens. Significant contraband included suspected K2, a screw, and burnt paper. And the honor guard was not deployed in June. Enclosure number 9, staff development, wellness, and retention. 20 individuals were interviewed for correctional officer positions. 77 applications were received. The Strategic Inmate Management, or SIM, change team has been meeting with representatives from the National Institute of Corrections to prepare for the implementation of the SIM model later this year. Candidates to become SIM trainers have been selected. Sergeant Steve Bass was named our instructor trainer for Human Factors Threat Pattern Recognition Training. He has successfully completed all certifications. 11 staff members utilized the Wellness and Retention Office for the first time. 3 members were referred to external mental health resources, and the DCDC Peer Support Chapter, a newly formed division within the First Responders Foundation, received its first donations. Donations will be used to provide staff care packages after traumatic incidents and to show appreciation for exemplary performance. Other noteworthy items: we are in the final stages of design planning for our mental health edition. It is hoped that groundbreaking will occur, from what I hear now, it's probably October. And that'll be followed by approximately 2 years of construction. After careful consideration and evaluation, we selected Wexford Health to be the provider of our mental and mental health services at DCDC. We have already begun preparations and contract negotiations with Wexford in anticipation of a September 1st start date. And the National Institute of Corrections actually was already here in July to train the trainers and train our supervisors in SIM, or Strategic Inmate Management, and a full rollout will occur over the next coming weeks and months. And actually that first training of frontline staff will be happening before the end of this month. With that, Commissioners, I am ready for your questions.
Thank you, Director Myers. We'll first go to Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thanks for this. Some good news here. Average daily population down. The programs seem to be working in that we can measure it in terms of people incarcerated going down, and we can actually put a dollar amount on that in terms of the money saved the taxpayers. I think you estimated in here, was it 300 and some thousand?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. And that's based on a per diem of what?
That currently is based on a per diem of 120. That, when you get data from September, the math on that will change when our new medical contract takes effect. That'll drive our per diem up upwards of to close to 160.
Okay. And that's an important number we should keep track of, because, I mean, even at 160, it seems a little low to me, but I'm sure that you've got some metrics to back that up that we could look into and maybe.
It basically is our whole budget divided by our ADP divided by 365
Gotcha.
days.
The breaking ground and last steps of the design of the mental health edition, we have ongoing concerns about the eligibility of this project, which I think exceeds $30 million. Is that right?
I believe so, Commissioner.
Being eligible for ARPA funding, and if it's deemed not by the federal government, the danger of having all that money clawed back, or we'd have to pay back the federal government. This isn't something that I'm asking for your opinion on. This is a lawyer's question, and we've had lawyers in front of us who say we run a severe danger here. I'm just making a record that that danger does exist, and we should address that more fully with the federal agency in charge, and possibly the Treasury Department and the Justice Department as well, before we go full bore into a $30+ million thing. But I'd be interested in seeing those plans. We had one session. I don't know if we are scheduled to have a follow-up. It'd be good if we did. If there's going to be a committee hearing or something on that, please let us know. The staffing, another good news portion here. We all remember when we struggled to get staffing anywhere close to 90%, and now authorized staff in total is at 99%, and critically, the corrections officers, frontline officers, authorized staff is 347, and we have on hand 356, 103% of staffing. And I've got to hand it to you and your administration for making that possible. We've enhanced compensation for people going into corrections as a career, but I think that you've also enhanced the texture of the style of the department overall to encourage people to do that, and I want to congratulate you on that. If I run out of time here, I want to come back to talk a little bit about the substance abuse, but the demographics run, again, troublingly high for 57.3% minority population. As a matter of fact, the white population, 42.7, and the black population of 39.1 are almost identical, which is incredible if you know anything about the demographics of Douglas County. That's not representative at all. But that's beyond your control. We understand that. When we come back, I want to talk to you about the substance abuse class, the evaluation, the sobriety admission, and the sobriety violations a little bit, because it seems like a large percentage, probably the largest percentage of our inmate population struggle with some kind of a substance problem. Is that accurate?
That's time.
Thank you.
We'll look back around. Thank you. Commissioner Borgerson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike, the $120 per diem rate, does that, what you just rattled off, sounded like it just included direct costs, not indirect costs?
I think that probably is inclusive of everything, because we're looking at our whole budget.
Do we have a breakdown of what direct costs versus indirect costs are?
I couldn't rattle that off of the top of my head, but we can prepare that.
Okay, all right.
And I guess I need to probably clarify what you mean by direct and indirect and get that from you.
Well, there's a formula that I think we use to determine indirect, so you might want to work with our chief financial officer
I'll
in
talk with
determining what those are.
Okay.
We, at one time, had an outside group come in and help us determine what those indirect costs would include. And I don't know if that would change the rate
Right.
or not, but, and then when you start talking about those saved combined 28 days for the sanction center, and then I'm assuming it would be this, there'd be days saved from work release, house arrest,
Right.
reentry. So if we can get a little bit more clarity on the savings of those.
Yep.
And then maybe scale it out or graph it out that each month, like that 316,560 in detention costs for pretrial, theoretically, was just for the month of June, correct?
That's correct.
So maybe graph what was saved so we can follow that over the course of time with these community programs. And then when the hospital admissions, which resulted in 20 days of hospitalization, were many of those more than 24 hours?
I couldn't break that down for you, but yes, many of them are over 24 hours. I don't have that data in front of me to tell you how many were. Typically, if we're talking about, these are, we had, I believe I said there were 25 emergency room visits. So you can probably safely assume that the 8
were 911.
the 8 that were actually admitted did stay more than 24 hours because they did have a hospital admission.
So actually 8 were 911.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
7
So
were
those
hospital.
7, correct, 7 were admitted.
So are the cost of that care recouped either by Medicaid, insurance?
So currently we still have an outgoing agreement with WellPath, and we're negotiating with Wexford. So currently our arrangement is that WellPath is responsible for 100% of off-site medical costs. I do know that they immediately do the applications for Medicaid when somebody gets admitted. Since Medicaid expanded, those costs have gone down significantly. And I actually have, recently gotten data from them on which will help guide us in our negotiations with Wexford. We've
Right.
looked back at the last 2 years of their costs,
Right.
so that we can make an informed decision on what business model makes sense for Douglas County going forward.
Okay. And that detailed information might be interesting at some point
Yep.
in a report at some time. So I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thanks. Mike, getting back to the substance abuse question, you have a series of categories in here, and we'll just kind of take them as they come in the pages. I think on page 23, you have a substance abuse class graph. You see where I'm at?
Yes, I do. I'm just making sure that I have the right, I have to go back and make sure that, okay.
I think
yes.
this is a class. It
is.
The heading just says substance
So,
abuse.
so these are, this is a reflection on people achieving overall goals. So
Sorry?
this is a reflection of people achieving goals, which may include treatment, it may include a class, it may include, getting an evaluation done. So this particular data, you can see there's a no progress, partially completed. So this is just for people who were released in the month of June. And again, it's actually shorted a few days because of the absence of one of my staff members. But so you can see the green is they completed all the tasks that their reentry specialist
Sure.
or case manager set before them before they got out.
Okay. So there seems to be kind of a steady decline year over year. If we go back to June 23, this particular category of inmates had 38 had completed, 23 had partially completed, 11 had made no progress. If we go forward a year to June 2024, and taking into account what you said about the staff
Right.
being off, instead of 38 completed, there's 17. Instead of 23 partially, there's 3. And instead of 11 no progress, there's 5. I don't know if that
So there
not
is,
flex
there,
anything, but that trend over that year, if you look
Right.
at this graph, is kind of.
so we had a disruption of the payment source that drug on for several months, that recently got resolved. We rely on a lot of, CMHC and other providers who come in and do the evaluations. There was a I don't know the best way to describe this. It was a catch-22 where, because they were with Medicaid being expanded, people who were had Medicaid before they became incarcerated, their Medicaid became suspended, but they were not removed from the program when they came to jail. So Region 6 would traditionally pick up that payment in the past. Their system wouldn't allow Region 6 to pay for it because they were still on the Medicaid rolls. So
Okay, just going forward, because we got time here.
Yep.
You had staffing problems and you had, financing problems.
Correct.
Okay. On page 27, where we have substance use disorder evaluations, a number reflects evaluations arranged by DCDC reentry staff, not third-party entities. And I'm just looking at a couple of these categories. Substance use evaluation completed for individuals, current unavailable. In the second one,
I'm sorry,
individuals.
Commissioner, could you tell me what page you're on? I'm sorry.
Page 27, substance use disorder evaluations.
Yes.
Two categories appear to be unavailable in whole or in part. And the second one, individuals on waiting lists for substance use evaluation, current unavailable, and year-to-date NA. And, down below, number unable to obtain evaluation due to insurance issues. NA, this issue has been resolved. Substance abuse disorder evaluations, does that play into this substance use program that we talked about?
Yes, it's a gatekeeper.
That's time. Let's start a third round for
Oh,
Commissioner
sorry.
Kavanaugh and a 2-minute round. And go ahead.
So yeah, the substance abuse evaluations are a gatekeeper, and this may have been because we don't do the substance evaluate. Our own staff do not complete the substance use evaluations. This may have the number of missing
Okay.
information.
And because of time constraints, I'm gonna have to hurry you along here a little bit. On page 32, sobriety admissions and releases. We have, for this last month, admissions, it appears to be 61 and releases 45. What's a sobriety admission?
So the 24/7 sobriety program is a condition of pretrial release.
Okay.
So this is where individuals who, if there's some nexus to their crime that they're accused of,
Right.
that has a drug and alcohol connection, the judge can impose the supervision of either twice daily alcohol testing or twice weekly drug testing,
Okay,
or
does
both.
that play into this next, on page 33, 24/7 sobriety violations
That's
number?
correct. Yep.
Okay, which seems to be quite high if we're comparing it to the previous page. For June, it appears no-shows alone were 39, and then there are subcategories of that. When these sobriety of violations occur, is it the case that someone who has been on release for 24/7 is reincarcerated?
Yes, that the sanction for a no-show is a short-term incarceration. And I want to keep in mind, those no-shows, those are out of thousands. There's 500,
That's kind of the
590.
question I was getting to.
Yes.
What percentage of the overall 24/7?
Less than 1%. I mean, I'm going to say approximately 1%.
Okay, so of the 100% allowed into the 24/7, 1% falls.
Go ahead and answer, and then we'll wrap up.
So so if there were 600 people on the program approximately, if each one of them on the alcohol protocol has to come in twice a day. So it's 600, that's times 2 is 1,200 tests that are done every day. So that 39 means, what is that, 40,000 tests or something like that. That means that there were a total of, I think I did my math wrong, I added a zero in there. Actually, I can see, there's 2,781 breath tests that were done. Only 39 people no-showed for nearly 3,000 occurrences, so yes, about 1%.
Okay,
Thank you for
that's
that.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Director Myers. Is there any other comment on this report? If not, I'll take a motion for adjournment. Motion by Morgan, second by Rogers. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We'll now jump into our Board of Commissioners agenda. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Borgeson? Commissioner Boyle? Commissioner Kavanaugh? Commissioner Friend? Commissioner Morgan? Commissioner Rogers? Mr. Chair.
Here. First items of business are items A and B. A being the approval of minutes of the Board of Commissioners meeting and the Board of Commissioners budget meeting held Tuesday, July 9th, 2024. And B, the approval of claims submitted for payment process through Tuesday, July 23rd, 2024. Do I have a motion and a second for both? Second. Motion by Rogers, second by Morgan. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We'll now jump into our consent agenda for items A through M. Do I have a motion and a second for discussion? Motion by Rogers, second by Morgan. I know there's a few in the audience that want to comment on item E, but I'll jump to commissioners first. Commissioner Kavanaugh?
Yes, I just have, for the record, some clarification items. And I note that we have Mark LaFleur from the Youth Center, if he'd come down for a quick clarification. Mark?
Mark LaFleur, Douglas County Youth Center.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
These first three items, Mark, A, B, and C, are for services that we provide to the children that are incarcerated at the youth center, right?
That's correct.
And these are continuations of programs that we've had for some time?
Yes, both of them.
Okay.
We're all three. The yoga, we're going into, I believe, our 4th year, 5th year. The practical applications, we're going into our 8th year. And Swank, we've had even before I was at the youth center.
And they're successful. I mean, you've got how many kids in the youth center today?
96.
I'm sorry?
96.
96?
Correct.
Okay, so that's a lot of kids, and you got to keep them kind of entertained and busy and educated, and all of this goes to that. And I appreciate the work that you're doing. I just wanted to get kind of a sense of what we're doing and how many kids we're serving today. That's a lot of kids.
Yes, sir. That is.
Thank you for this. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. We will take commentary from the public. I know on item E, Sheriff wanted to make a few remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Douglas County Sheriff Aaron Hansen. I just wanted to briefly make a comment about item E, very near and dear to my heart. You know, one of the most precious, valuable commodities we have in the Sheriff's Office, it's not our equipment. It's not any particular item that we have. It's our people, our sworn and our civilian staff. You know, the last year and a half has been unprecedented. Our staff has dealt with historic upswings in homicide investigations, very complex property crime investigations, both on the sworn and the civilian side. And they've approached it with professionalism and approached every investigation to the fullest. And I've witnessed firsthand that often there is a price to be paid for that. There's a price on their families. There's a price on their work-life balance, their personal life and work-life balance. And so this contract, Jason Workman, who's a therapist, he's willing to contract with us to help give us that professional pathway to create a peer support program. And kudos to Jason Workman, who's well known in the first responder industry. He's present here on Zoom if you had questions. When I asked him how much it would cost to extend this contract to also being available, both the training component to create a peer support culture within public safety in Douglas County Sheriff's Office, but also as a conduit to help make sure that folks know who to call if they do need help, but they don't know who to talk to. When I asked him how much it would be additional to extend that service to our partners in Valley, in Bennington, and Waterloo, and Ralston, and he said nothing. He said no additional cost. Kudos to him, and I can tell you that each of those chiefs are very excited also to create a positive culture of peer support in the Douglas County first responder public safety community that we have. So I thank you for giving me the opportunity, and I thank you in advance for what I hope is your support of keeping our first responders healthy so they can give exceptional service and continue to give exceptional service to the public that we serve.
Thank you, Sheriff, for helping them bring this forward. Thank you for also to Mr. Workman for your partnership on this. Other comments or questions on consent agenda? If not, we'll vote. Oh, I think we motion a second already. Yep.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We'll move forward to our presentation. We have one, item A, final report on National Association of Counties Commission on Mental Health and Well-Being. I will toss it to Commissioner Borgeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone. As past president of our National Association of Counties, or NACO, and also a proud member of the National Association of Counties Commission on Health and Well-Being, I'm honored today to provide you this report which is our final report from the Health and Well-Being Commission. So in February of 2023, NACO established the Commission on Mental Health and Well-Being to rally county officials and our partners around a mission to confront our nation's escalating mental health crisis. As Commission members and county leaders, we advocated tirelessly for accountability, flexibility, incentives, and reforms that promote better outcomes, optimize resources, foster collaboration, and encourage compassion. Over the last year, the Commission made considerable progress through strategic policy advocacy and collaboration with federal, state, and community leaders. Our efforts focus on 4 foundational policy priorities: amending exclusionary policies under Medicaid, enhancing local crisis response systems, strengthening the mental health workforce, and enforcing mental health parity. This morning, I'll provide you with an overview of the Commission's final report titled From Crisis to Solutions, Policy Catalysts for Improved Outcomes. This report highlights the accomplishments and the milestones of the Commission and future steps and recommendations for federal policymakers and county leaders as we continue to address the mental health crisis. But before I present the report, let's just talk about the national landscape of mental health crisis and our case for action. So nearly 1 in 4 U.S. adults ages 18 or older in the U.S. experience a mental health illness each year, with 26% of those experiencing a serious mental illness. The youth are not exempt from this crisis. In fact, 1 in 5 adolescents ages 12 through 17 experience a major depressive episode each year, per year. Data also shows that 1 in 4 people detained in jails, which we just heard today, 50.1% of our population, experience that met the threshold for serious psychological distress, and 44% have been previously diagnosed with a mental health disorder. So in response to these challenges, the Commission has accomplished the following: Last year, we secured Medicaid and CHIP benefits for justice-involved youth in pretrial status and influenced key legislation for pretrial detainees and those reentering the community. This year, we achieved federal reforms that permanently waived the IMD exclusion on substance abuse disorder treatment, allowing federal reimbursement for up to 30 days of inpatient treatment. We enhanced access to crisis services through new rulemaking by the Federal Communications Commission, or the FCC, that will geo-route 988 calls based on a caller's location, thereby improving access to the suicide and crisis lifeline, which previously it was the zip code. And we all know sometimes we don't even have a phone from our own area code, but when you called, you may not even be in that same spot. So we worked really hard on this geo route, and so they're actually going to be able to pinpoint that person's location regardless of what your area code is or where you live. So you may be in Maryland, use your phone, they'll be able to find you if you need help. And then we joined President Biden in announcing a new rule aimed at strengthening the Mental Health Parity and Addiction Equity Act, and would work to better align mental health service coverage with that of physical health. And this is important, and again, we brought it up yesterday at the Board of Trustees, because if this isn't happening when it comes to parity in our services, then we need to take a look at that. And then we advanced key legislation to address mental health professional shortages, healthcare disparities through workforce development, telehealth, and community health centers. So the goal of this report was not only to express the Commission's milestones, but to urge federal policymakers, local leaders, and stakeholders to support and implement the recommendations listed throughout. The collaboration and commitment of intergovernmental partnerships is crucial for creating lasting change in mental health services. We continue to emphasize the urgent need for local, state, and federal leadership and reform in mental health policies. We call on federal policymakers to join us in making common sense reform, such as removing the federal limitation on Medicaid benefits for incarcerated individuals, coordinating resources for developing crisis call centers and allocate funding of the crisis response infrastructure, creating pathways for behavioral health professionals in underserved area and increase funding for workforce recruitment, and incentivizing and enforcing existing parity policies across all insurers and providers. So we've made great progress in advancing our priorities for mental health service access and policy reform, and yet we know there's still a lot of work to do in this space. So our future efforts will be focused on mental health services for youth and our vulnerable populations, and promoting equitable access to mental health services for all communities. And we recognize that the need to leverage early intervention opportunities. We need to try and diversify our local workforce and develop best practices and standards to better engage with our communities and residents. So I'm going to pass out our report to all of you. I really encourage you to read the report and share your thoughts on it, and then also add any suggestions that you might have after reading it for further improvements or issues that we may be working on or could work on for the well-being in our communities. And lastly, I really just want to thank the board for making mental health and behavioral health our top priority, and appreciate our ongoing commitment to this important issue and the work that we do here in Douglas County around these issues. So with that, I'll pass these out to each of you. And again, after you read them, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. So thank you.
All right. Thank you, Commissioner Borgeson, for your continued work on mental health, and also to the commission as well for this. Yes, go ahead, Larry.
Larry Storr, 5015 Lafayette Avenue, 68132. I noticed on the board up there that the American Legislative Exchange Council is zooming in on our meeting today, and I want to point out that the Founding Fathers designed a system of government for the federal government to share responsibility, but not share the responsibility with the state and local governments. There's supposed to be a separation there also. But as evidenced through your speech, Marianne, which, and I don't disagree entirely, but you're supposed to be listening to us, not the American Legion Legislative Exchange Council or NACO, who, by the way, has an office right across from the State House. You're supposed to listen to the citizens, not the 501c3s and national organizations. And I would like to think that you people would be discussing right now the real crisis of the border.
Larry,
And
can we keep it on the mental health report, please? That's the
Excuse me,
topic.
excuse me, have you not listened to the topic of the crisis at the border? There
This is
are
about the mental health
illegals coming
report
across
by
that
the
are being
commission that
released
was mentioned.
from mental institutions and prisons, and you're not gonna discuss it? You're gonna end up funding them. They're being put up already at taxpayer expense in rather nice places. And you people don't wanna discuss that. Oh. You should probably step down.
Thank you, Larry. All right, we'll jump to Commissioner Friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to, I don't have to pat her on the back or give her kudos, but I do want to thank Commissioner Borgeson for this because one of the things that I've learned a lot about is over the last 5 years, and not just from her, is community mental health for a variety of reasons. And I get my information from a lot of different areas. I think I can speak for every commissioner, and this isn't in response to what Larry just said. This is in response to anybody in the community who thinks that I or any other commissioner takes marching orders from anyone. We were elected to represent 70,000 people in each of our districts. We listen to people on a consistent basis. We answer emails, we answer phone calls, we go out to sites to look at ditches, to try to figure out whether a ditch witch needs to be used to create, better flow on their property. Look, here's an example. I was reading, I don't do it every night, but I was reading the Federalist Papers last night. And the majority of the Federalist Papers were written by Alexander Hamilton. Alexander Hamilton is not a constituent of mine. I get all kinds of ideas from the Federalist Papers. I get all kinds of ideas from books that were delivered, like a book delivered to me this morning. I get all kinds of information and dialogue from information that is delivered to me in this form. I do not live in a cave and I do not live in a bubble. I don't think any other commissioner does either.
Thank you.
I've said over and over again, when people come up here and they speak, we listen. I know what they're saying. I digest it. And I think every commissioner here does as well. That being said, I also would point out, final point, is that when I go through this, and I think Commissioner Borgeson knows this, and I have issues or I have concerns, she'll be the first to know. That's it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We'll go to Commissioner Borgeson.
Well, I also want to make a comment because I agree that every commissioner listens to their constituents in all, really, county residents, no matter where they live. And this topic is a topic that I don't care what room you're in, it's going to touch probably the majority. And I'll give you an example. I talked one session at our Republican Central Committee, and I did my County Government 101 PowerPoint to give them a flavor of what county did. And one of the questions that was asked of me was, can you expound on what you do for mental health? And so they only gave me 10 minutes, but I was there for 2 hours because that question was the catalyst for people feeling they were in a safe place to talk about whether it be their own, their grandchild, their son, their daughter, their husband. It didn't matter who it was. They wanted to talk about their issue, their experience, with the mental health in general, the mental health system, but their mental health experience. And so I was floored, and I was totally honored to be able to be there and listen to them and them feel safe enough to ask me the questions and tell me their stories like they told me. And so that was just, again, added to the importance of this issue and what we do and us making it a priority for Douglas County, because it affects youth to our older Americans, and it's only going to increase because of our growing population. So again, I'm thankful we have resources, and as Commissioner Friend said, there's lots of resources. I'm just bringing this one because we were at our annual conference and the report was done, and we showcased it to folks to take back to their communities. And so, we listen to a lot of people, we get a lot of resources, and I'm not ever gonna stop, because this is, and I hope it remains, a top priority here in Douglas County on how we address this, from youth to elders. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments on this item? If not, we will proceed in the agenda here. Our next items are under committee discussion action, section 6. First one being A, finance. We have item 1, budget report as presented. And then we have item 2, which is a resolution supporting the legislature and governor in their pursuit of property tax relief in a responsible manner that takes into account the unique and complex issues facing urban counties and that allows for local control and responsible local budgeting. Just to provide a little bit of context before I read the resolution to further explain this item, this is a coordinated effort that developed through some discussions with our urban county colleagues at Lancaster County, at Sarpy County, and with Douglas County. Clearly, we have some unique attributes as 3 counties in Nebraska that have an urban core and urban population. Between the 3 of us, we actually make up 56% of the state population. So you can tell that things are unique and at times a little bit more complex with the systems we are dealing with here at the local level in the urban counties. So we wanted to make sure that we had a voice in this upcoming discussion with the special session, as some externally have asked to see us as urban counties state our position and have a voice on this topic. And so this is one of our efforts to make sure that we are taking a stance on this upcoming discussion. And of course, there will be more rich debate to come locally and at the state level. So that provides a little bit of context. There will be similar resolutions that will be put forth by the Sarpy County Board and the Lancaster County Board today to have this coordinated effort between the urban counties. So with that being said, I will go ahead and read the resolution so we get the substance of it on the record here. So it reads, whereas the Nebraska legislature is expected to convene for a special session to be called by Governor Pillen on or about July 25th, 2024, to pursue a package of tax reform legislation. And whereas the members of this board have supported good shepherding of tax dollars by maintaining and lowering Douglas County's tax levy in recent years. And whereas our county represents a small percentage of the local tax bill at 13.1%. And whereas any restrictions on local control will adversely limit Douglas County's ability to provide core functions mandated by state law. And whereas local budgets are already strained due to rising inflation, an ever-changing and competitive market for personnel and staffing, rising costs for contracted services that are essential to our core services, continued population growth in our urban counties that face substantial demand for local services, and state mandates that required the counties to pay for state services for which the state provides no appropriation. And whereas this board acknowledges the complexity of providing property tax relief in a manner that caters to the uniqueness of our rural counties without harming the distinct attributes of Nebraska's 3 urban counties of Douglas, Lancaster, and Sarpy, and their unique needs in criminal justice, law enforcement, public health and safety, mental and behavioral health, and urban population growth. And whereas hard caps on county expenditures that do not account for our county's vibrant growth and the reality of inflation based on CPI and exceptions for essential public safety, law enforcement, and criminal justice services put Nebraska families at risk and would be harmful to the entire state of Nebraska while diminishing our common desire to have Nebraska be the safest and best place to raise a family and start a business. And whereas this board stands with the NACO Board of Directors in opposing any cap of 0% or CPI, whichever is greater, with limited exceptions, considering that a 0% hard cap would severely limit the ability of counties to meet obligations and mandates essential for citizen safety, infrastructure, community programs, and other critical services. Now, therefore, be it resolved by the Board of County Commissioners of Douglas County, Nebraska, that this board hereby supports the legislature and governor in their pursuit of tax reform in a responsible manner that takes into account the foregoing unique and complex issues and allows for local control and responsible local budgeting to ensure the safety and health of Nebraska families. And be it further resolved that leaders in the criminal justice, law enforcement, public safety, and mental and behavioral health sectors of Douglas County support our board's effort to advise against new statutory provisions that would adversely affect the operations and practical needs of their divisions in coming years. Dated this day of 23rd day of July, 2024. With that, we'll open up for discussion. We'll start with Commissioner Friend and then Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Everybody can see that I guess I've been involved in discussions, and I was also a co-sponsor on this particular measure, this resolution. I've had people question me or ask what our need is for weighing in on this. I think some of that's pretty evident as you dig into property tax recodification. But this resolution is pretty innocuous. I mean, it's essentially a resolution, but there's a reason behind it. And I just wanted to express my thought process in regard to the reason. It was needed. The legislature will sit down there, 49 of them, and they'll go, well, what does Douglas County think? What does Sarpy County think? What does Lancaster County think? Again, I mentioned that this is fairly innocuous, but this is kind of what we think. We have things that we're doing that you are essentially making us do, and we just want you to know, what our thought process is. The reason the resolution, I guess, to the final point, the reason the resolution was needed is almost twofold. One, we have no idea yet, no clear understanding of what this proposal is going to look like. They're about to go into a special session, and we have no idea. There's no green copy. There's nothing, to the best of my knowledge. I haven't seen it. There is no understanding of what statutory language is going to be put in place by hardly anyone. Now, they may present that today or tomorrow. I think they're supposed to go into special session on Thursday. But secondly, we also don't know when there is a proposal, if the proposal will factor in allowances for the approximately 60% or more of the services that the county provides, which are I've said it before, which are mandated by state law. We don't have any choice. We've got to do it. So are they going to put factors in that deal for those allowances, or at least address those potential allowances? Because we don't know what that copy looks like, we don't know whether that's going to be the case. Some of those services that we're providing, some are reimbursed by the state and the feds, but most of the time not fully, and sometimes not at all. So that being the case, and there's not a person on this planet that really cares what I think about this, but I'm going to say it anyway because I can. A normal process would have been preferred. There's 2 sessions in a legislative cycle. There's a 90-day session and there's a 60-day session. What they did last time, what the legislature did last time, is they went into a 60-day session and they tried to recodify a property tax code. Tough ask in a 60-day session. Very tough ask. In a 90-day session would be preferable because you have more time. Not just that you have more time, it would allow for the Revenue Committee to do appropriate analysis. You could keep that thing sitting in committee for 30 days. You could restructure that particular bill. The Revenue Committee could restructure it. They'd have 10, 20, 30 days. You could leave it in committee as long as you need to and then rush it out to the floor when you get a consensus, when you get 33 votes. That's the first thing. Second thing is it would have allowed for the Appropriations Committee analysis, because there's going to be an appropriation function here. Almost guaranteed. You watch, mark my words, that's my crystal ball. Appropriation will have wanted to weigh in, because when the Revenue Committee kicks something out to the floor, it's going to be chaos. Oh, I'm almost out of time.
That's time.
Thank you.
Yes, we can come back around if you want another round. We'll jump to Commissioner Kavanaugh.
Thank you. I want to start off by saying I generally agree with the sentiments contained in this resolution. You know, and as they say, the perfect is the enemy of the good. I think the guts of it are we oppose hard caps on county expenditures. That's in the 5th whereas here. And we join the NACO board in opposing any caps of 0% or CPI, whichever is greater. I believe that means on expenditures, although it doesn't say that. This is a matter of local control. We're elected to establish our budgets and mill levies by the voters of Douglas County. And we are responsible to them for doing a good job. I think a couple of things that I would say, in my opinion, could possibly make this resolution a little better would be addressing in the whereas where we talk about the things that drive our budget and expenditure process. We should be very, very sensitive to the elimination of waste, in addition to all of these other factors that some of which are beyond our control. But waste is something that we do have the ability to control. And I'm not offering an amendment to this, but I'm saying for the record that in addition to all these other items that we contend with, we need, and I believe will, do the best that we can to eliminate wasteful spending and the resultant property tax increases here at the local level. The only other thing that I would maybe emphasize, and it is mentioned kind of in the final resolution, but health is as important as public safety. They're interrelated in many respects, but where we say that hard caps on county expenditures do not account for our county's vibrant growth, reality of inflation based on CPI, the exceptions for essential public services, law enforcement, criminal justice, and health services should be in there. I think that the board generally puts them in the same category because we're talking about, and we mentioned this later, obligations and mandates. Some of these are hard mandates, and some of them are obligations that we have assumed for the betterment of our community. Health is high on that, as commissioners have commented here today. Mental health is very high on our priority list right now, but physical health as well. And I would make sure that we emphasize that in our presentations to the legislature. We're probably the largest county in terms of providing public safety services, and we're certainly the largest county in terms of providing mental and physical health care services. All of those would be negatively impacted by this. My concern is that the proposal that the legislature is going to be presented with will result in a tax shift from people who can afford their tax obligations to people who struggle paycheck to paycheck. And that is going to come at the expense of people's public safety and people's health services. And we need to make sure that the legislature takes into account, and I'm glad that we're joined by our other two large urban counties, that takes into account that 56% of the Nebraska population would be very negatively impacted by a 0% cap on our expenditures and our ability to provide needed services that we do today. So in that sense, I support this resolution, and I will vote for it.
Thank you, Commissioner Kavanaugh. We will jump to Commissioner Morgan.
I appreciate the comments of my colleagues. I was thinking I'd likely maybe abstain for the reason that we don't know exactly what's going to come from the legislature meeting and the governor. Secondly, I know some others of you were at that Sunday meeting where the people were there talking about Bennington School District and some of the mill levies and that kind of thing. I feel like when you talk about the CPI, that was running probably at 7% last year. We don't know exactly what they're gonna do, and I think we're gonna have plenty of time to give more input as time goes on. And I do know that when they talked about it earlier this year, they did put something in there about public safety, and that if there were the challenges as in the public safety area, and we faced those when we were 65, 67 officers short at our correction facility, we had to give raises of 20%, I think, to get to where we are. And I know the city of Omaha right now is down 120 police officers, where fortunately the sheriff's office, I believe, is at full staff. So that was my only thought. I think, I'm appreciative, as all of you are, that we're trying to do something on tax reform, so that, people aren't faced with the situation of being one of the leaders in the nation as far as our property taxes. We're about the 5th or 6th highest in the United States on property taxes. So I'm going to continue to listen. I think some other commissioners might chime in, but that was my reason, and we're supposed to state why we might abstain, and I'm still thinking I might. And the reason is because we don't know what exactly they're going to do. And we will have more time, I'm sure, for discussion here in the weeks ahead as we listen to the state senators. And we saw that group Sunday, some of the state senators talking about their opposition to this proposal. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. We will go to Commissioner Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think previously Commissioner mentioned the emphasis on health, but the other piece in there that, if we decide to add some things at some point or whatever, but just went on the record for discussion when this goes down, because this is just a basis. But the one key point in there, I think, that we just need to recognize and make known publicly is, we state law enforcement, public health, and safety, mental health, but you have to add technology in there, because we saw that play out this year in respects to the requests that came from certain offices based on the simple change that the Omaha Police Department did in regards to gathering evidence and other things, which trickled down here, and what we had to adjust now. And that to me is just one exception. The other demands on technology that are coming and how things are switching there, those technology increases are going to drive a lot of things, and they're going to be way out. They're no longer an option. And the urbans, maybe a little more, the urban counties' technology demands will be probably more robust than the rules. So I just wanted to put that on the record that that's something that cannot be omitted and should be noted. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rogers. I will take a quick round as well. There's a lot that can be discussed, of course, some of which is in the resolution, other items not as in detail, but I just want to mention, while we are not seeing the special session in action at the moment, we do have access to the governor's plan that was just released last Thursday at 10 a.m. with the press conference that he had, and then the plan that was released on his official governor's website. So we do have access to that, and there definitely are concerns around that official plan. I just want to also note that the plan document erroneously states that all levels of government receive property taxes, sales taxes, and income tax. That is not the case. The county does not receive sales tax. The county does not receive income tax. We are largely based solely on property taxes, and to our own detriment, because if anything happens, if the economy goes down and market rate goes down, and that affects our budget, or if there's some kind of proposal that caps us at 0%, that's going to affect us heavily more than other entities, because our colleagues at the city do get sales tax, and other entities do benefit from other forms of taxes. We do not get sales tax, just to clarify. Aside from that, if we were capped at 0% and solely had to rely on CPI that ties to inflation, sure. In recent history with post-pandemic era, kind of the latter part of the pandemic, inflation obviously was high for all of us. We felt that. And so CPI was a little higher, 4, 5, 6% in the last 1, 2, 3 years. But on a normal year, so to speak, like in 2020, 2019, 2018, CPI was more along the lines of 1.4%, 1.8%. So if all we had was CPI at 1.4%, how would we meet the obligations for even just a simple cost of living increase for our employees and personnel and our union contracts that we have? We wouldn't have enough funds to meet those obligations, and I don't think our dedicated county employees or city employees or local government employees are by any means the problem or the enemy. And I only say it in that way because the plan that I read really points the finger at local government, is excess spending, but we provide simple cost of living increases just like any other employer would provide that, whether it's private sector or public sector. A dedicated employee expects a simple cost of living increase, 3, 4, or 5%, it kind of depending on the year and the budget and everything, right? But at least 3%, 2, 3, 4% is kind of what you see in the private sector, in the public sector as well, in government. So being capped at 0% with a simple CPI of 1.4 in a normal year, that would be very harmful to our operations, and that doesn't even take into account other miscellaneous items, just like when the county attorney and county defenders needed to upgrade their technology. That was a high expense that was not in a normal budget year, that they needed to upgrade the technology. When we have a tornado response and needed to invest an extra $200,000 into landfill fees that we're covering for citizens because we don't want them to pay it. That's local government stepping in and being able to utilize our local discretion to cover those kinds of expenses. So I have a little more to say, but I'm out of time, so I will loop back around and give it to Commissioner Borgeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I support the resolution, and as we've been going through our meeting, there has been some news that has been released that we all know that there were drastic cuts in the state budget here, sweeps of many agency and department budgets, and now there was quietly a directive to state agencies to slash another 280 million to pay for the tax plan. And why I say that is because as we talk about unfunded mandates, we have to also talk about underfunded mandates and tax shifts. And over the course of the last few years, the tax shifts have been occurring more and more. So when the state stops something or decides not to do it or doesn't fund it appropriately, it rolls downhill to us and we're mandated to do it. We can't say no. And his mantra about saying no doesn't work when you have mandates. So we're mandated to take care of the poor and the indigent of our counties, the mental health of our citizenry. We can't say no. And so it's unrealistic in that premise, and it's also unrealistic if he wants to talk about growing Nebraska. I mean, our growth in Douglas County has been okay. I mean, we've grown about 2,200 each years for the last 4 years. Not huge, and this is before annexation numbers had occurred. So, I mean, it's okay, but if we want to grow, with growth come expense. And if we have a zero cap where we can't, then we don't grow. And so that's not making sense to me. And as a businessman, I would think that the governor would understand that. But it was stated Sunday night when we spoke at the senators, which I am thankful they held the town hall listening session, that we're 13% of the property tax pie. And I mean, we just went through our budget with no cuts. And so that tells me everybody thinks we need all of that. And now going forward, it's going to hurt if this passes. And so we also talked about how we only have the property tax as the majority of our revenue sources. We do not have sales tax, income tax, occupation tax, restaurant tax, wheel tax. We get none of that. We are solely dependent upon property taxes to provide, again, all of the mandates, many unfunded, many underfunded, and many of the tax shifts that have occurred. So every one of us wants to try to solve the property tax issue. There's no doubt about that. But we have to do it in a much more realistic and meaningful way than how it's being done. And so this resolution, again, I will be supporting. And I also, I don't mean to speak for the board, but I think all of us put ourselves out there to say we want to work with the state, with our senators, with the governor's office to solve this issue for our citizenry. So I'll be supporting it.
Thank you, Commissioner Borgerson. We'll jump to Commissioner Friend.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And just to finish up, at least I've established that it would have been better during a 90-day session. That ship has sailed. They're not going to do that. They're going to come in later in the week and they're going to do what they're going to do. Final point on why that would have been advantageous. It would have been more beneficial. Not just the Revenue Committee analysis, not the time that the Revenue Committee could take, but also the Appropriations Committee, the time the Appropriations Committee could take. Somebody goes, well, wait a minute, Mike, appropriations is for state, funded departments and services. We're an arm of the state. Everything the Appropriations Committee does, not everything, but 60% of it's going to affect us. So when the Appropriations Committee makes a determination to fund something or not fund something, there's going to be trickle down. The county's going to see that effect. All we're saying with a resolution like this, like I said, it's pretty innocuous. It's pretty high level. But all we're saying with a resolution like this is the legislature has to factor in those intangibles. The big question is, and again, the ship has sailed, Do they have enough time to do that in a special session? I guess we'll see. I can tell you, and I've said it before, one of the best ways to approach this would not just be to recodify the property tax, not just to do recodification of the property tax code, but to go in and deal with the sales tax code, which they may dabble with, they may try to take a swing at. That hasn't been fully recodified since, I think, 1968. We've tried to do it over the last 20 years to no avail. Good luck with that in a special session. And income tax. When have we addressed that recently? Last time I can really remember that it was actually communicated to the public is when, ConAgra got a, corporate welfare or whatever they got back in 1974 or whatever it was, and now they're gone. Look, we're not saving the world with this resolution. What we're doing is saying, hey, guys, we're out here, just don't forget. Because once they make a determination after the special session, then we got to play the hand we're dealt. And I can tell you, I can echo Chair Garcia's comments from the other day. We'll cut. We'll cut if we have to. As a matter of fact, we'll probably cut even if we don't have to. We'll cut. We're not afraid of that. But you can only cut so deep. I know where those cuts could come from. I know how deep you could go. And when you do that, when you're done with that, then you got to go in and you got to start looking at mandated programs with the statute behind it. And you got to go, are you going to be state legislature? Are you going to be the ones to tell the county attorney, the public defender, the sheriff's office, corrections that, well, you better tighten your belt there too. You better start squeezing. I'll tell them, but then you run the risk of jeopardizing public safety. And you're violating state law. So we're just saying, hey, this is probably long overdue. We're saying we're out here. We're saying at least communicate with us. And by the way, the legislature has been communicating with us. It hasn't been that bad. So we'll see what happens. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. We shall jump to Commissioner Morgan.
Okay, I have great respect for all my colleagues here and listen to your comments. I do have to correct my friend. ConAgra still has 1,100 people working in downtown Omaha, which I'm thankful for, and has consistently done that, so I don't want to say they left. And it was in the 80s, I think, when the legislation was passed, somewhere in there when they built the campus. And there's good things still happening there that increase our property taxes with the brick line and some other things. I think you've all made some good points. As I said, I was leaning toward and thinking I was going to abstain because we don't know, but I think our chairman, in talking about when inflation was running at 1.8, I know what would happen if that was the case. We'd be in serious trouble with not just mandated things, but everything. And it's important to note, no one has said it yet, but I think we've said it plenty, all of us. We only get 13% of the property taxes. It's not 50-some% as the schools get. And that's important to continue to repeat, in my opinion. And the city gets more than 20-some%, plus the sales tax, plus the restaurant tax, et cetera. So we are faced with those issues. So I'm going to vote with this, and we'll continue to have input in it and support this resolution. And I appreciate all of your comments much. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Morgan. I'll take another quick round here. I think that, again, going back to the official plan, a lot of it points the finger at local government, and it seems like a hip reaction to just take away local control, force 0% caps, and move away from that long precedent of valuing local control, which is a conservative value. We don't want somebody at the Capitol, mandating what local communities should be doing. We elect our local representatives, we have direct access to them, and if we want to fire them, we can do that too at election time, right? So that is a value that is longstanding in Nebraska. So we also need to note that the core issues around this topic really should remain the focus. I mean, we see that our property tax bills are majority local schools, right? It's going to local schools. 55% goes towards my OPS bill, probably similar to others. In Lancaster County, we heard some commentary that as high as 62% going to their local school and Lincoln Public Schools. So again, I'm not advocating for any means of weakening our local schools, but if the core issue is that we're paying so much in property taxes and the bulk majority of our bill is local schools, how can that be balanced in the way where we keep our local schools strong, but it doesn't rely so heavily as a burden to the local taxpayer? Can the state invest more? Is there something else that could be weaved into the formula where that local burden is lessened to the taxpayer and they actually see that result in their local tax bill? So that should remain a core focus, and that has nothing to do with taking away local control from our local boards or what our small 13% budget does. Because in reality, if you put a 0% cap moving forward, that's not going to lower that 13% we already have that's cruising forward. So it's not even going to lower the tax bill if you do that moving forward. So again, focus on the core issues. What's another core issue? Assessments. We hear a lot about that. Assessments have gone too high. Okay, that also doesn't have anything to do with our local control of our local budget and services to taxpayers. So remain focused on that core issue. What we do in regards to assessment at the local level follows state law. State law mandates how we calculate assessments, how we do assessments at the local level. So it's a state law issue and a state issue. So if that needs to be tweaked in any way, have a debate on that, a rich debate on that. State law mandates that we chase the market, right? As we heard about earlier. Does that need to be tweaked? I don't know, maybe. Have a rich debate on that. State law mandates that we stay within the range of 92 to 100%. Does that need to be tweaked down to 88%, 86%? I don't know. Have a rich debate on that as that relates to the core issue of assessments going so high in recent years. We talked about caps. Maybe they're a bad idea. Maybe they're a decent idea. Other states do it. We don't at the moment. And I'm talking about the caps on assessment increase, not on local budgets. And so it sounded like a 3% cap would get you too far behind on your growing value, so that might be a bad idea. What about a cap of no more than 10 to 15% on any given year? I don't know if that's a great idea or not, but it should be richly debated if assessments is a core issue that people are concerned about. We can also look at homestead exemptions. Do we need to tweak that so that the age can be slightly earlier? Instead of 65, it's 63. Instead of an income limit of 61,000, it's 75,000. I don't know. All these things could be richly debated to truly address the core issues of assessments and also our taxes going heavily towards our local school system. So with that, let me end my second round, and give it to Commissioner Borgeson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, what your comments just did was solidify Commissioner Friend's comments that this should not be done in a short session nor a special session, that this should go back to a 90-day session where you're crafting a biennium budget and have that full-fledged debate and hearings and input and whatever else. But that right there, I mean, it just says it, that's really what should happen. And I think we're getting too willy-nilly and fast-paced, and that's going to end up coming back and biting us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Commissioner Borgeson. I will take a final third round, which is just 2 minutes, by the way. To finish my thoughts here, as mentioned, so much of what we do is state mandated, and a lot of those state mandated provisions and services that we provide, we don't even get reimbursements for, and that's why we are so heavily reliant on our local budget, which is just 13% of the tax bill. And therefore, if the state wants us to have more flexibility to be able to do, a tax levy decrease in future years, if we even maintain that control, take away some of our unfunded mandates. We currently pay for the staff office space for the state's Health and Human Services staffing. We pay for that at the county level just because the state mandates we do, even though it's an unfunded mandate. We currently, for inmates that we're holding for the state that are eventually going to the state prison, we're holding them and we don't get a reimbursement for that. There used to be a reimbursement for corrections at the local level for that circumstance, but we no longer get that state appropriation. We pay for the judges' staff, the state judges here locally. We pay for their office space and some of the staff actually as well. We subsidize the rate for probation for the youth that are in our local county youth detention center. We are subsidizing a piece of that rate because we don't get a full reimbursement for holding them. There's so many things that we pay for that is state mandated that does not receive any kind of state appropriation or support, and that's why we have to step up to the plate and have the budget that we have to be able to pay for those services. So maybe take away some of those mandates if you want us to have a little more flexibility to be able to reduce our budget a bit. So aside from that, and how much time do I have? Oh, look, it's almost all 2 minutes. So there's a lot been said, and we're looking forward to engaging in good, productive discussion with our state colleagues in the Ledge and the governor's office. With that, is there any more comments on this item? If not, we'll vote.
Can I get the motion and second repeated?
Oh, yeah, I think, can I get a motion and a second? Motion by Borgeson, second by Friend.
All righty. Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We'll move forward here to close out our agenda. Under Human Services, we do have weekly personnel report from Civil Service as presented, and then one resolution approving contract for SAVI for county employees to utilize a unique platform that helps student loan borrowers better understand their debt, optimize their repayment options, and enroll in the best plan for financial need. We did have a presentation on this service a few weeks ago. Was there anything you'd like to comment? No, otherwise we can vote. Motion by Borgeson, second by Rogers. Any comments? Otherwise, let's vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. We do have a need for executive session for litigation and legal advice. Do I have a motion second? Motion by Rogers, second by Morgan. Please vote.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. The board will now go into executive session for the purpose of litigation and legal advice.
Motion by Commissioner Friend to reconvene and adjourn, second by Commissioner Kavanaugh. Motion passes 7-0. We're adjourned at 11:24 a.m.